The bottom of the ninth inning, bases loaded, 2 outs, and Luis Rivera steps into the batter's box with his team trailing 4-3 in the Texas High School State Championship. The Friday night lights of Dell Diamond in Round Rock cast long shadows across the diamond as 20,000 fans hold their breath. His hands shake slightly as he grips the Louisville slugger, not from nerves about the pitch, but from the words fighting to break free from his throat. Words that 3 hours ago had transformed his entire team from broken boys into believers. The same stutter that had made him the target of cruel jokes and whispered mockery now seemed like a distant memory as he dug his cleats into the red dirt. This was the moment his small town of Fredericksburg had dreamed about since he was 8 years old, sitting in the stands watching his older brother Miguel play for the same Battlin' Billies uniform. The count goes to 3-2, the crowd rises to their feet, and Luis closes his eyes for just a moment, remembering the journey that brought him from the benchwarmer who couldn't string 2 sentences together to the kid who might just save their season. 3 months earlier, if you'd told anyone at Fredericksburg High that Luis Rivera would be standing in this moment, they would have laughed until their sides hurt. The same kid who stumbled over his own name during roll call, who ate lunch alone in the library to avoid the daily torment, who spent more time riding pine than playing ball, that kid was now their last hope. But sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the deepest struggles, and sometimes the voice that trembles the most carries the most power when it finally finds its strength. This is the story of how a 14-year-old boy's greatest weakness became his team's greatest strength, how a stutter became a rallying cry, and how one speech in a locker room changed everything, not just for a baseball season, but for an entire community that learned what it truly means to find your voice when it matters most. Hello my friends, before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Fredericksburg, Texas, population 10,875. Sits nestled in the heart of hill country like a German-American time capsule wrapped in barbecue smoke and Friday night lights. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, your family history, and exactly how many strikeouts you had in Little League 5 years ago. Main Street still looks like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, with the old courthouse square surrounded by beer gardens and antique shops that cater to weekend tourists from Austin and San Antonio. But for the kids growing up here, Fredericksburg revolves around 2 things: high school football in the fall and baseball in the spring, with the Battlin' Billies serving as the heartbeat of community pride. The Rivera family had been part of that heartbeat for 3 generations, with Luis's grandfather playing semi-pro ball in the 1960s and his father coaching Little League until a work accident at the limestone quarry ended his involvement in sports altogether. Now, it was Luis's turn to carry on the family tradition, except he was carrying something else too. A stutter that made every word feel like climbing a mountain with a backpack full of rocks. Maria Rivera worked double shifts at the Hill Country Memorial Hospital as a nurse's aide while her husband Carlos recovered from his back surgery. Their small ranch house on the outskirts of town filled with the sounds of ESPN highlights and Luis's younger sister Sophia practicing violin. Luis had inherited his father's compact build and quick hands, perfect for turning double plays, but he'd also inherited something from his mother's side of the family, a speech impediment that made him stumble over consonants like they were hidden potholes in the dark. At 14, he was all elbows and knees, still waiting for his growth spurt while watching his classmates shoot up like hill country mesquite trees after a spring rain. His older brother Miguel had been the golden child, the star shortstop, who earned a partial scholarship to Texas State before a torn ACL junior year ended those dreams and sent him to work at the feed store with a permanent limp and a chip on his shoulder. The pressure on Luis to succeed where Miguel had failed was like wearing a weighted vest during wind sprints, always there, always heavy, always reminding him that he was running behind everyone else. The bullying started in 7th grade. Innocent enough at first, just kids being kids, as the adults liked to say. When they didn't want to deal with the real problem, hey LLYs, "Can you tell me what time it is?" became the soundtrack of his middle school years, echoing through hallways and bouncing off locked doors like some cruel form of audio torture. The worst part wasn't the mimicking, it was the waiting, the anticipation of when it would happen. Next, like walking through a minefield where every step might trigger an explosion of laughter and pointing fingers. His grades suffered because he stopped raising his hand in class, even when he knew the answers, because the risk of stumbling over words in front of everyone was worse than getting marked down for lack of participation. Baseball had been his refuge, the one place where his glove could speak louder than his voice, where his actions on the field mattered more than his words in the dugout. Coach Jake Morrison had been watching Luis since Little League, recognizing something special in the way the kid could read a batter's stance or anticipate a runner's jump towards second base. Morrison himself was a Fredericksburg native, a former minor league prospect who'd made it as high as Double-A, before realizing his future was in molding young talent rather than chasing impossible dreams. At 52, he'd seen hundreds of kids come through his program, but there was something about Luis that reminded him of himself at that age. The hunger in his eyes, the way he studied every pitch like it contained the secrets of the universe, the quiet intensity that burned beneath a shy exterior. Morrison had also noticed the way Luis's teammates treated him. The subtle exclusion, the eye rolls when Luis tried to contribute to dugout conversations, the way they'd finish his sentences for him like he was some kind of broken toy that needed fixing. It broke Morrison's heart because he knew Luis had more baseball IQ in his little finger than most of his starters had in their entire bodies. But talent meant nothing if you couldn't communicate with your teammates or believe in yourself. When the pressure mounted. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in late February. During the first week of spring practice, when the Texas sun was just starting to remember how to warm the earth and the mesquite trees were budding, with the promise of another baseball season, Luis was taking ground balls at second base, working on his footwork around the bag, when Jake Patterson, the starting catcher and undisputed king of the freshman class, social hierarchy, decided to provide some entertainment for the other players. "Hey Rivera, why don't you call out the play for us?" "Oh wait, you can't." The laughter that followed wasn't just cruel. It was the kind of systematic humiliation that strips away dignity one syllable at a time. Luis felt his face burn red as the West Texas wind, his hands trembling as he tried to focus on the next ground ball, but the words of his teammates echoed in his head like a broken record player stuck on the worst possible song. He bobbled an easy grounder, then another, until Coach Morrison finally called for water break and pulled Luis aside near the backstop, where the afternoon shadows provided some privacy. Morrison knelt down to Luis's eye level, his weathered hands gripping the boy's shoulders with the same gentle firmness he'd used to handle a wounded bird. "Son, I've been coaching for 23 years, and I've never seen anyone read a game the way you do. You see things other players miss. You anticipate plays before they happen, and your baseball instincts are off the charts." Luis looked down at his cleats, unable to meet his coach's eyes, the weight of disappointment and shame pressing down on his chest like a concrete blanket. Morrison continued, his voice carrying the patience of someone who understood that sometimes the most important conversations happen in whispers rather than shouts. "But if you don't start believing in yourself, if you don't find a way to use that voice of yours, all that talent is gonna waste away like morning dew in August heat. Your teammates need to hear what you're thinking out there, and more importantly, you need to hear yourself say it." The conversation lasted only 5 minutes, but it planted a seed in Luis's mind that would grow slowly through the spring, watered by small moments of encouragement and fertilized by an increasingly desperate need to prove that he belonged on this team, stutter and all. That night, Luis sat in his bedroom with the door closed, practicing his speech in front of the mirror like some kids practice free throws or guitar chords. "My name is Luis Rivera, and I play second base for the Batlin Billies," over and over, focusing on the consonants that wanted to stick in his throat like peanut butter. Breathing deeply between words, the way his mother had taught him when he was little and afraid of thunderstorms. Outside his window, he could hear the sound of Sophia practicing violin, The same scales repeated endlessly until they became muscle memory. And he wondered if maybe speech could be practiced the same way. Not as words that betrayed him, but as music that could be learned, mastered, and eventually performed without fear. The mirror reflected back a skinny kid with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. But for the first time in months, Luis saw something else in that reflection. Not the broken boy his classmates mocked, but a ball player who might just have something important to say if he could find the courage to say it. The first sign that this season might be different came during a March scrimmage against the Kerrville TV Antlers, when starting second baseman Tommy Chen went down with a twisted ankle chasing a foul pop that was never really catchable in the first place. Coach Morrison's eyes immediately found Luis on the bench, and for a moment that stretched like taffy in the humid air. The two of them shared a look that said everything and nothing all at once. "Rivera, you're in," Morrison called, and Luis felt his heart start hammering against his ribs like a woodpecker working on a stubborn oak tree. The walk from the dugout to second base felt like crossing the entire state of Texas, with every step carrying the weight of 3 years sitting on the bench, watching other kids live his dreams while he served as their personal punching bag and source of cheap entertainment. His glove felt foreign in his hands, too big and too small at the same time. But as soon as the first ground ball came his way, a sharp hopper up the middle, muscle memory took over and Luis snagged it, backhanded, pivoted, and fired a strike to first base that had Coach Morrison nodding approvingly from the third base coaching box. The Rivera family had been struggling financially since Carlos's accident, with medical bills piling up like autumn leaves and Maria working extra shifts that left her exhausted and worried about everything from the mortgage payment to Luce's school clothes. Baseball equipment was expensive, and Luis had been making do with Miguel's hand-me-down glove and cleats that were a half size too small. But he never complained because he understood that every dollar spent on his dreams was a dollar his family couldn't spend on necessities. The night after his first start, Maria found Luis in the backyard throwing a tennis ball against the side of their storage shed, the rhythmic thunk-thunk serving as a metronome for his racing thoughts. "Mijo, you played beautiful today," she said in the mixture of Spanish and English that served as their family's private language, wrapping her arms around her son in a hug that smelled like hospital disinfectant and vanilla body lotion. Luis wanted to tell her about how it felt to finally be out there, to be part of the action instead of watching from the sidelines. But the words tangled in his throat like Christmas lights stored too hastily in January. The social dynamics at Fredericksburg High were as clearly defined as the chalk lines on a baseball diamond, with the popular kids occupying the territory between the cafeteria and the main hallway, while kids like Luis navigated the margins like base runners trying to avoid getting picked off. His stutter made him an easy target for the kind of casual cruelty that teenagers specialize in. The daily microaggressions that chip away at self-confidence like water wearing down limestone. Jake Patterson wasn't just the starting catcher, he was also the ringleader of the group that made Luce's life miserable. A kid who'd peaked in 8th grade and was desperately trying to maintain his social status by keeping others beneath him. The irony wasn't lost on Luis that Jake was also one of the worst defensive catchers in the district, with a throwing arm like overcooked spaghetti and game-calling skills that made opposing teams' jobs easier. But social hierarchies in high school have nothing to do with actual talent and everything to do with perception and fear. Enter Coach Morrison, who became something Luis had never really had before, a true mentor who saw potential where others saw problems. Morrison had played alongside kids who stuttered during his minor league days, and he understood that speech impediments had nothing to do with intelligence, courage, or leadership ability. He started staying after practice with Luis, working not just on double play pivots and base coverage, but on communication drills that slowly built the boy's confidence in using his voice on the field. Baseball is a conversation, Morrison would say, hitting ground balls while Luis practiced calling out plays and situations. "You gotta talk to your shortstop, communicate with your outfielders," Let everyone know what you're seeing and thinking. Your stutter doesn't make you less of a leader, it just makes you work harder to be heard, and sometimes that extra work makes your words more powerful than everyone else's. These after-school sessions became the highlight of Luis's day. The 1 hour where he felt truly valued and understood, where his ideas about baseball strategy were welcomed rather than mocked. The breakthrough moment came during a game against the Bernie Greyhounds, when Luis noticed their cleanup hitter had a tell. A subtle shift of his front foot that revealed whether he was looking for a fastball or breaking ball. Luis had been seeing it for 3 innings, his baseball mind cataloging the pattern like a computer processing data. But every time he tried to signal the information to pitcher Danny Martinez, the words would stick in his throat like burrs on a hunting dog. Finally, in the bottom of the 7th, with the game tied 3-3, Luis called timeout and jogged to the mound, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the entire stadium could hear it. "Danny," he started, then took a deep breath and tried again. "Danny, watch his F front foot. If it M moves back, he's looking F fastball. If it stays put, he W wants the curve." Danny looked skeptical for a moment, glancing around at the other infielders who were gathering around the mound. But something in Luis's eyes convinced him to trust the scouting report. The next pitch was a curveball that the hitter was clearly expecting to be a fastball, and his weak pop-up to third base ended the inning and preserved the tie. The attention that followed, Luis's growing contributions on the field, was a double-edged sword, sharper than any criticism he'd faced before. Local newspaper reporters started noticing the scrappy second baseman who seemed to anticipate plays before they happened, and opposing coaches began game planning around his defensive positioning and base-running instincts. But with increased visibility came increased scrutiny from his own classmates, who resented seeing someone they'd written off as a loser suddenly getting recognition and praise. The bullying intensified, becoming more systematic and cruel, with Jake Patterson leading a campaign of psychological warfare designed to convince Luis that he didn't belong and never would. Just because you can catch a ground ball doesn't mean anyone wants to hear you talk. Jake would whisper during team meetings, or coach only plays you because he feels sorry for the Araret, mimicking Luis's stutter with theatrical exaggeration. That made other players snicker and look away uncomfortably. The decision point came on a rainy Thursday in early April, when Luis sat in his truck in the school parking lot after another brutal day of harassment, seriously considering quitting the team and fading back into the anonymity he'd known for most of his high school career. His phone buzzed with a text from Coach Morrison: "Weather cleared up. Optional practice in an hour if you want to work on that backhand flip we talked about." Luis stared at the message for a long time, rain drumming against his windshield like fingers tapping on a desk, and realized that he had a choice to make that would define not just his baseball career, but the kind of person he wanted to become. He could surrender to the bullies and spend the rest of high school invisible and safe. Or he could fight for his place on the team and risk even more humiliation and pain. The choice, when it came down to it, was between fear and hope, between giving up on his dreams and fighting for them one stammered word at a time. Luis started his truck, put it in drive, and headed toward the baseball field, not knowing that he was driving toward a destiny that would change everything for himself and everyone around him. Asterisk. The first official day of district play arrived, with the kind of pressure that makes diamonds out of coal and heroes out of ordinary kids. But for Luis Rivera, it felt more like being buried alive under the weight of everyone's expectations. The Battlin' Billies were picked to finish third in district, which in Texas high school baseball might as well be last place, since only the top 2 teams advance to playoffs, and nobody remembers who comes in third except their disappointed parents and frustrated coaches. Luis had worked his way into the starting lineup through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to be in the right place at exactly the right time. But starting was one thing, thriving under the Friday night lights with college scouts in the stands and every mistake magnified by the unforgiving mathematics of district standings was something else entirely. His teammates still treated him like a necessary evil. The kid who could play the position but wasn't really one of them. And Luis could feel their skepticism every time he stepped onto the field, like walking through a room full of people who were all whispering about you the moment you turned your back. The academic pressure at Fredericksburg High was relentless for student athletes, with the UIL's no pass no play rule hanging over every player's head like a sword waiting to drop. Luis had always been a solid B student, but the stress of starting varsity baseball while dealing with daily harassment was affecting his concentration in ways that showed up in missed assignments and distracted moments during class discussions. Mrs. Henderson, his AP English teacher, noticed the change immediately. The way Luis would stare out the window during discussions of To Kill a Mockingbird. How his usually thoughtful essays had become stilted and careful, avoiding any topic that might require him to defend his opinions in class. She pulled him aside after school one day, her classroom smelling like coffee and dry erase markers, and said the words that would haunt Luis for weeks. "I know you're dealing with something difficult, Luis, but you can't let whatever's happening outside this classroom affect your future. You're too smart and too talented to waste your potential because some immature kids don't know how to treat people with respect." The conversation lasted 10 minutes, but it planted a seed of understanding in Luis's mind about the connection between finding his voice academically and finding his voice on the baseball field. The social challenges multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish as Luis's profile on the team grew, and the bullying from Jake Patterson's crew became more sophisticated and psychological. They discovered that Luis had a crush on Emma Rodriguez, a junior who worked on the school newspaper and had actually interviewed him for a feature story about the team's unlikely turnaround season. The harassment took on new dimensions of cruelty, with fake text messages claiming to be from Emma, and elaborate pranks designed to humiliate Luis in front of her. Like the time they convinced him that Emma wanted to meet him after school only to have a dozen kids hiding in the hallway with phones recording his disappointment and confusion. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation. It was the way these incidents made Luis second-guess every positive interaction, wondering if people were being genuinely kind or just setting him up for another fall. His trust in others began eroding, like topsoil in a flash flood, leaving him increasingly isolated even as his baseball performance continued to improve. The physical and mental obstacles seemed to pile up like cars in a highway accident, each one making the situation more dangerous and difficult to navigate. During a crucial game against the Mason Punchers, Luis dove for a line drive up the middle and landed hard on his shoulder, creating a separation that left him playing in constant pain for the next 3 weeks. Coach Morrison wanted to rest him, but Luis begged to stay in the lineup, knowing that his replacement would be Jake Patterson's best friend, Tommy Webb, who had been lobbying for Luis's position since the season started. Playing injured meant that every throw across the diamond sent lightning bolts of pain through his shoulder, and Luis had to develop new techniques for making double plays that relied more on footwork and timing than arm strength. Meanwhile, his parents were dealing with their own crisis, as Carlos's medical bills began threatening the family's ability to keep their house, and Luis watched his mother's stress lines deepen every day while she tried to shield her children from the growing financial disaster that was consuming their family's stability. The introduction of serious competition came in the form of the Bandera Bulldogs, the defending district champions who treated every game like a personal insult that needed to be answered with overwhelming force. Their shortstop, Cameron Walsh, was a senior with offers from 3 Division I schools and a reputation for trash talk that could make grown men cry. During pre-game warm-ups, Walsh made sure to position himself where Luis could hear every comment about the stuttering kid who thinks he belongs on the same field as real players. The psychological warfare was deliberate and effective, designed to get inside Luis's head and make him overthink every play, every throw, every decision. But Walsh made the mistake of underestimating the quiet fire that burned inside Luis Rivera, the accumulated fuel of years of humiliation and dismissal that was finally ready to combust into something pure and powerful and transformative. The support system that surrounded Luis was fragile but fierce. built from the unexpected kindness of people who saw something in him that he couldn't yet see in himself. Sophia, his younger sister, started leaving notes in his baseball bag, silly drawings and inside jokes that reminded him he was loved unconditionally by at least one person in the world. Maria Rivera began attending every home game despite working double shifts, her nurse's uniform still visible under her batlin. Billy's t-shirt as she cheered from the stands with a voice that carried across the entire field. Even Carlos, still recovering from his back surgery, dragged himself to games and offered quiet advice about handling pressure and staying focused on what mattered. Most surprisingly, Danny Martinez, the team's star pitcher, began including Luis in conversations and strategy sessions, recognizing that the quiet second baseman had insights about opposing hitters that could help win games. This growing network of support created a foundation strong enough to weather the storms that were coming, though none of them realized just how severe those storms would be. The rock-bottom moment arrived on a Tuesday night in late April, during a home game against the Harper Longhorns that the Billies needed to win to stay in playoff contention. Luis had been dealing with a particularly brutal week of harassment, including an incident where Jake Patterson and his crew had put a fake dating profile online using Luis's picture and personal information, leading to humiliating phone calls and text messages that followed him home and invaded the one space where he'd felt safe. His concentration was shot, his confidence shattered, and it showed in his play from the first inning. He bobbled a routine grounder that led to 2 unearned runs, overthrew first base on what should have been an easy double play, and struck out swinging at 3 pitches that weren't even close to the strike zone. By the 7th inning, with the Billies trailing 8-2 and their playoff hopes circling the drain, Luis sat in the dugout feeling like he'd let down everyone who had ever believed in him, including himself. The shame was so overwhelming that he couldn't even look at Coach Morrison, couldn't bear to see the disappointment in his mentor's eyes, couldn't face the reality that maybe Jake Patterson and all the others had been right about him all along. The transformation began in the most unlikely place imaginable, the janitor's closet behind the school gymnasium, where Luis had retreated after another brutal day of harassment that included having his backpack thrown into the cafeteria trash can while Jake Patterson's crew filmed it for their social media accounts. He was sitting on an overturned mop bucket, crying tears of frustration and rage, when Mr. Rodriguez, Emma's father and the head custodian, found him there during his evening rounds. "You know, mijo," Mr. Rodriguez said in heavily accented English, settling his considerable bulk against the doorframe, "I've been watching you play ball, and I've been watching how these kids treat you. My Emma, she tells me you got mas corazón than all of them put together." Luis looked up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, expecting to see pity, but finding something else entirely: respect, understanding, and the kind of weathered wisdom that comes from surviving your own struggles and coming out stronger on the other side. Mr. Rodriguez had immigrated from Mexico 23 years earlier, speaking no English and facing his own battles with communication and acceptance. But he'd built a life for his family through determination and an unshakable belief that hard work and good character eventually triumph over ignorance and cruelty. The conversation that followed lasted over an hour, with Mr. Rodriguez sharing stories about his own journey from silence to voice, from invisible immigrant to respected community member who was known for his integrity and kindness. Your words, de donde, come easy. See? But when they come, people listen. Pork, they know you don't waste them on nothing important. He told Luis about watching him play, about seeing the way he communicated with his teammates through actions rather than words, how his defensive positioning and base-running instincts spoke louder than any trash talk or boastful speeches. "Think your stutter makes you weak, but I see something different. I see a young man who thinks before he speaks, who chooses his words careful, who listens then he talks. In my country, we say el sabio habla poco, pero dice mucho. Wise man speaks little, but says much. Maybe your stutter is not your weakness, mijo. Maybe it's your superpower." The words hit Luis like a fastball to the chest, Not because they were revolutionary, but because they reframed everything he'd believed about himself in a way that suddenly made perfect sense. The community support that had been building quietly throughout the season suddenly became visible and powerful, like underground roots finally breaking through the surface to become a mighty oak tree. Emma Rodriguez published her feature story about Luis in the school newspaper, titled "The Quiet Leader," which focused not on his stutter but on his baseball IQ, and the way he'd transformed the team's defense through positioning and communication. The story went viral on social media, shared by former players, parents, and community members who recognized something special in the shy kid who was changing the culture of Batlin. Billy's baseball one play at a time. Local businesses began posting signs of support, and Luis started receiving messages from other students who struggled with speech impediments, learning disabilities, and social anxiety, thanking him for showing them that their differences didn't have to define their limitations. The outpouring of support was overwhelming and healing, like rain after a long drought. And Luis began to understand that his story was bigger than baseball. It was about finding the courage to be yourself, in a world that often rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. The relationship deepening happened gradually, like the slow change of seasons. But it was most evident in Luis's growing bond with Coach Morrison, who had become more than a mentor. He'd become the father figure Luis needed during this crucial period of his development. Morrison recognized that Luis's analytical mind and strategic thinking made him a natural leader. But leadership required more than knowledge. It required the confidence to share that knowledge with others, even when your voice shakes and your words don't come easily. They spent hours after practice working not just on baseball skills, but on communication techniques, with Morrison sharing his own struggles with self-doubt and the imposter syndrome that had nearly ended his minor league career before he learned to trust his instincts and value his contributions. The best leaders I ever played with weren't the loudest guys in the clubhouse, Morrison told Luis during one of their evening sessions. They were the guys who saw what others missed, who thought 2 steps ahead, who made everyone around them better just by being there. That's you, son. That's exactly who you are. The new strategy that emerged from these conversations was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of trying to overcome his stutter, Luis would embrace it as part of his communication style, using the natural pauses and careful word selection to his advantage. Morrison introduced him to the concept of quiet leadership, showing him examples of successful coaches and players throughout baseball history who led through example, preparation, and strategic thinking rather than vocal dominance. They developed a system of signals and abbreviated communications that allowed Luis to share his insights about opposing hitters, defensive positioning, and game situations without requiring lengthy speeches or explanations. Most importantly, Luis learned that authenticity was more powerful than perfection, that his teammates respected genuine effort more than flawless delivery, and that his careful, thoughtful approach to communication actually made his words carry more weight when he chose to use them. The preparation montage that followed was like watching a master craftsman perfect his art, with Luis spending hours studying video of opposing teams, charting tendencies, and developing strategic insights that would give the Billies an edge in crucial games. He created detailed scouting reports that he shared with Coach Morrison, filled with observations about hitters' weaknesses, pitchers' patterns, and situational tendencies that could be exploited. His bedroom became a command center covered with statistics, charts, and diagrams that looked like something from a military strategist's war room. Sophia would find him there late at night, surrounded by baseball cards and notebooks, preparing for opponents like he was studying for the most important test of his life. And in many ways he was, because the upcoming district championship game against the Bernie Greyhounds would determine not just the team's playoff fate, but whether Luis Rivera would finally find the voice that had been hiding inside him. All along, the confidence building was a gradual process, like physical therapy after an injury, with small victories accumulating into larger breakthroughs that created momentum and belief. Luis started volunteering answers in English class, his voice steady despite the slight hesitation that would always be part of his speech pattern. He joined conversations in the dugout, offering insights about opponents and strategy that his teammates began seeking out and respecting. Most significantly, he started standing up to Jake Patterson's harassment. Not with anger or confrontation, but with a quiet dignity that made the bullying look petty and desperate rather than powerful and intimidating. The transformation was visible to everyone: teachers, classmates, family members, who watched Luis Rivera evolve from a frightened, isolated teenager into a confident young man who understood that his differences were strengths rather than weaknesses, that his voice mattered not because it was perfect, but because it was authentically his own. The morning of the district championship game dawned gray and humid, with thunderclouds building on the horizon like an approaching army, and the kind of oppressive heat that makes Texas Springs legendary among people who've never experienced the suffocating weight of 90-degree temperatures combined with 85% humidity. The Battling Billies were facing the Boerne Greyhounds at their home field, a pristine facility with perfectly manicured infield dirt and outfield grass, so green it looked like it belonged in a baseball movie rather than real life. The Greyhounds had won 3 straight district championships and hadn't lost a home game in 2 seasons. With a senior-laden lineup that included 5 players already committed to Division I programs and a pitching staff that had been shutting down opposing offenses all year like they were playing against Little League teams. For the Billies, this game represented everything they'd worked toward since February, not just a chance at the playoffs, but validation that their improbable season hadn't been a fluke, that a team of misfits and overlooked players could compete with the elite programs that dominated Texas high school baseball. Luis Rivera arrived at the field 3 hours before game time. Unable to sit still in his house while his nervous energy built up like steam in a pressure cooker, he found Coach Morrison already there, hitting fungos to an empty infield and working through his own pregame anxiety in the only way he knew how, by preparing for every possible scenario and contingency. They worked together in comfortable silence, Morrison hitting ground balls while Luis practiced his footwork and double play pivots, both of them understanding that this might be their last practice together if the season ended today. The rest of the team trickled in gradually, their usual pregame chatter subdued by the magnitude of what they were facing and the knowledge that most of them would never play meaningful baseball again after graduation. Luis could feel the tension in the air like static electricity before a thunderstorm, could see it in the way his teammates checked and rechecked their equipment, in the nervous glances toward the visiting dugout where the Greyhounds were taking batting practice with the casual confidence of a team that expected to win simply because they always had. The game began with all the pageantry and excitement that makes high school sports the beating heart of small-town America, with the Fredericksburg faithful filling the visitors' bleachers and making enough noise to compete with the larger Boerne crowd. The national anthem was performed by Sofia Rivera on her violin, her clear, beautiful notes floating across the field like a prayer for her brother's success. And Luis felt tears sting his eyes as he watched his little sister perform flawlessly, in front of hundreds of people, without a trace of the stage fright that had paralyzed him for so many years. The ceremonial first pitch was thrown by a World War II veteran who had played for Boerne High in 1943. And as Luis watched the old man's arthritic hands grip the baseball, he was reminded of the generations of players who had stood where he was standing, facing their own moments of truth and transformation. This was bigger than baseball, bigger than high school, bigger than his own personal struggles. This was about proving that dreams don't have expiration dates, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most difficult circumstances. The early innings were a pitcher's duel that showcased everything beautiful and frustrating about baseball, with both teams manufacturing scoring opportunities only to see them disappear due to stellar defensive plays or clutch pitching. Danny Martinez was dealing for the Billies, his fastball humming and his curveball snapping like a window shade. But Boerne's ace, Tyler Hamilton, was matching him pitch for pitch with the kind of command and composure that had earned him a full scholarship to Texas A&M. Luis had done his homework on Hamilton, charting his tendencies and identifying patterns in his pitch selection. But knowing what was coming and actually executing against a pitcher of that caliber were two entirely different challenges. Through 4 innings, the game remained scoreless, with both teams squandering opportunities and the tension building like water behind a dam that was straining to hold back the flood. The breakthrough came in the top of the 5th, when Bernie's cleanup hitter launched a Danny Martinez fastball over the left field fence, with enough authority to send a message that the Greyhounds weren't going to be denied their 4th straight championship. The home crowd erupted like they'd already won the game, and Luis could feel his teammates' shoulders sagging under the weight of expectations and the sudden reality that they were facing elimination. Danny walked the next 2 batters, his command, deserting him at exactly the wrong moment, and Coach Morrison called timeout to settle his rattled pitcher. But as Luis jogged toward the mound for the team meeting, he could see something in Danny's eyes that terrified him, the look of someone who was already defeated, who had convinced himself that the game was over before it actually was. The other infielders gathered around with their heads down, shoulders slumped in premature surrender, and Luis realized that someone needed to speak up or their season would die right there in a huddle 30 feet from second base. The words came, easier than they ever had before, flowing from Luis's mouth like water from a spring that had finally found its way to the surface. "Danny, look at me," he said, his voice steady despite the slight hesitation that would always be part of his speech pattern. "That was just one swing. One swing, don't win championships." The other players looked up, surprised to hear Luis taking charge of the conversation, but something in his tone commanded their attention and respect. "We've been working all season for this moment. All those tour days in February, all those extra batting practice sessions, all those times we got knocked down and got back up, it was all for right now." Luis looked each of his teammates in the eye, his stutter becoming less noticeable as his passion and conviction grew stronger. "They think they already won because they hit 1 home run. Let's show them what Batlin Billies are really made of. Let's show them that we don't quit just because someone hits the ball hard 1 time." The internal struggle that Luis faced in that moment was like wrestling with a ghost, fighting against years of self-doubt, accumulated shame, and the voice in his head that whispered he wasn't good enough, smart enough, or strong enough to lead his team in their darkest hour. But as he spoke to his teammates, as he watched their heads lift and their shoulders straighten, Luis felt something powerful clicking into place inside his chest. The realization that his stutter had never been about weakness or inadequacy, but about the careful consideration of words and the recognition that speech is powerful enough to change hearts, minds, and outcomes. His teammates weren't listening to him, despite his speech impediment. They were listening to him because his words carried the weight of genuine emotion and hard-earned wisdom. The hesitation in his voice made each word more precious, more deliberate, more meaningful than the easy eloquence of someone who had never struggled to be heard. The team dynamics shifted like tectonic plates after Luis's impromptu speech, with players who had barely acknowledged his existence all season suddenly looking to him for leadership and guidance. Danny Martinez found his command again, painting the outside corner with fastballs and keeping Bernie's hitters off balance with a changeup that dropped off the table like a ball rolling off a cliff. The defense behind him played with renewed energy and focus, turning to picture-perfect double plays that sent Luis's heart soaring as he watched his teammates execute the fundamentals they'd practiced thousands of times. Even Jake Patterson, who had spent months making Luis's life miserable, began following his lead on defensive positioning and seemed genuinely impressed by the strategic insights Luis shared between innings. The transformation was remarkable and immediate, like watching a group of individuals suddenly become a team in the truest sense of the word. The pivotal moment came in the bottom of the 7th inning. With the Billies trailing 4-3 and facing their last chance to extend the season and their dreams, Luis had reached base twice, both times on walks that demonstrated his improved plate discipline and ability to work counts in his favor. But now he found himself in the on-deck circle as the tying run, watching his teammate Marcus Williams battle Tyler Hamilton in a crucial at-bat. Williams fouled off for straight pitches, each one extending the tension and the possibilities, before finally drawing a walk that brought Luis to the plate as the potential game-tying run with one out and runners on first and second. The crowd noise was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to press against Luis from all directions. But as he stepped into the batter's box and dug his cleats into the red dirt, he felt calmer than he had all season. This was his moment, the culmination of everything he'd worked for and dreamed about. And win or lose, he was ready to face it with courage and authenticity. Asterisk. The immediate aftermath of Luis Rivera's game-winning double was like watching a small Texas town explode with joy. As hundreds of Fredericksburg fans poured onto the field to celebrate their Battling Billy's first district championship in over a decade, Luis found himself at the center of a swirling mass of teammates, coaches, family members, and community supporters, all of them wanting to touch the hero who had delivered when it mattered most. His mother reached him first, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her son in a hug that smelled like hospital scrubs and unconditional love, whispering, "Estoy tan orgullosa de ti, mijo," in his ear, while the chaos continued around them. Coach Morrison was next, his weathered face split by a grin wider than the Rio Grande, pulling Luis aside for a moment to say the words that would echo in the young man's memory for the rest of his life. "Son, you didn't just win a baseball game tonight. You found your voice, and when you found it, you used it to lift everyone around you. That's what real leaders do, and that's exactly who you've become." Even Jake Patterson approached Luis during the celebration, extending his hand with genuine respect and admitting, "I was wrong about you, Rivera. Dead wrong. You're the heart of this team, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." The long-term impact of that championship season rippled through Luis's life like stones thrown into still water, creating waves that would influence every decision and opportunity that followed. College recruiters who had never heard of Fredericksburg High suddenly found their way to the small hill country town, drawn by reports of a second baseman who combined exceptional defensive skills with natural leadership abilities and the kind of baseball IQ that coaches dream about finding in their players. Luis eventually accepted a partial scholarship to Texas State University, the same school his brother Miguel had attended before his injury. But this time, the Rivera family story would have a different ending, one written in perseverance rather than disappointment, in triumph rather than tragedy. More importantly, Luis's transformation from silent outcast to vocal leader inspired other students at Fredericksburg High who struggled with their own challenges, showing them that differences don't have to be limitations and that authentic courage often emerges from our deepest struggles rather than our greatest strengths. The life lessons that Luis learned during that transformative season became the foundation for everything that followed in his personal and professional development. He discovered that leadership isn't about having the loudest voice or the most confident delivery. It's about having something meaningful to say and the courage to say it when others need to hear it most. His stutter, which had been a source of shame and isolation for so many years, became a reminder that authentic communication requires vulnerability, that the most powerful words often come from those who have struggled to find them, and that listening is just as important as speaking. In any meaningful conversation, Luis learned that teams are built not on individual talent but on mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and the willingness to support each other through both triumph and failure. Most significantly, he understood that his story wasn't unique, that every person carries hidden struggles and untapped potential, and that sometimes all it takes to unlock that potential is one person who believes in you enough to give you a chance to believe in yourself. The character transformation that Luis underwent was as complete as a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, but unlike that natural metamorphosis, his change was earned through conscious choice, daily effort, and the kind of courage that can only be developed by facing your fears and discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined. The shy, stuttering boy who had entered high school as a target for bullies and a source of amusement for his classmates graduated as student body vice president, team captain, and the recipient of the school's character award for exemplifying the values of perseverance, integrity, and leadership. His speech at graduation was watched by millions on social media after Emma Rodriguez posted it online, with Luis delivering a message about finding your voice and using it to lift others. That resonated with people around the world who had faced their own battles with communication, confidence, and belonging. But the most meaningful transformation wasn't visible to the crowds or cameras. It was the quiet confidence that allowed Luis to introduce himself without hesitation, to speak up in meetings without fear, and to approach every new challenge with the knowledge that his voice mattered, not because it was perfect, but because it was genuinely his own. The community impact of Luis's story extended far beyond the baseball diamond, inspiring Fredericksburg High to implement anti-bullying programs and support systems for students with learning differences and communication challenges. Local businesses began sponsoring speech therapy programs, and the school district created peer mentorship opportunities that paired upperclassmen with underclassmen who needed encouragement and support. Coach Morrison used Luis's example in coaching clinics throughout Texas, teaching other coaches about the importance of looking beyond obvious talent to find the hidden leaders who might be waiting for someone to believe in them. The 2025 Battlin' Billies became legendary, not just for their championship, but for proving that teams built on character and mutual respect could compete with programs that recruited solely based on athletic ability and financial resources. The story became part of Fredericksburg folklore, passed down through generations of baseball players who learned that greatness isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how much courage you show when speaking matters most. The universal message that emerged from Luis Rivera's journey transcends sports, speech impediments, and small-town Texas. Speaking to anyone who has ever felt different, overlooked, or convinced that their struggles make them less worthy of success and respect. His story proves that our greatest weaknesses can become our most powerful strengths when we stop trying to hide them and start learning to embrace them as part of what makes us unique and valuable. It demonstrates that leadership comes in many forms, that quiet voices often carry the most wisdom, and that the people who work hardest to be heard often have the most important things to say. Luis's transformation reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear but the decision to act despite that fear. That authentic communication requires vulnerability rather than perfection, and that the most meaningful victories are often won, not against external opponents, but against the limiting beliefs we carry about ourselves and our potential. Years later, when Luis Rivera was introduced as the youngest assistant coach in Texas State University baseball history, his first words to his new team were delivered in the same careful, deliberate style that had once been a source of shame but had become his signature strength. "My name is Luis Rivera, and I'm here to help you find your voice. Not the voice you think people want to hear, but the voice that's authentically yours, the voice that can change games and lives and everything in between. When you finally find the courage to use it,